So welcome to today's webinar, Opportunities to Reduce Food Waste in the 2023 Farm Bill. This is such an important topic, and we're glad that y'all are able to join us today. The Farm Bill, as you know, is the largest piece of food-related legislation in the US, and it's at the core of how our food system operates. It is a major opportunity to improve how our food system operates because of that. And that includes improving what we're doing to cut the amount of food that is lost or wasted each year. Policy is really unique in its power to provide a spark that drives the food system into action. And during today's webinar, you'll hear recommendations on what those policies should be and what they can achieve. And as you'll hear, these recommendations come from a recently released report called Opportunities to Reduce Food Waste in the 2023 Farm Bill, which was co-authored by all of the organizations that are participating today. I see quite a few familiar names in the chat, but also many new ones. So for those who I haven't met yet, my name is Dana Gunders. I'm the Executive Director here at ReFED. And we at ReFED are so excited to be hosting this event today with some of our amazing partners, including the Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic, the Natural Resources Defense Council, Nrdc, and the World Wildlife Fund, WWF. I also want to let you know that the same organizations we are all hosting another event that comes right after this one. That is a special listening session for the upcoming White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health. You'll notice that food waste is not in that list of topics, but for those of you who know the topics, any of those topics or food waste, you'll know that there are some huge intersects between nutrition, health, hunger, and food going to waste. So if you are able, please join us for that. That's your chance to let your voice be heard. We'll be gathering your thoughts and ideas about how the federal, state, and local government and the private sector can reduce food loss and waste to improve public health, food access, food donation, food recovery, and other overlaps. And we will be delivering that to the White House to help inform the national strategy that they are developing and will be announcing at that White House conference in September. So that starts at 2 p.m. Eastern today, right after this. So if you'd like to join that, please make sure you're registered. It is a different registration link. So we'll be closing out this webinar when we're done, and you do need a new Zoom link to join that listening session. So we'll put that registration information in the chat box now. If you'd like to join us, please, again, register separately and then just hop on at the end of this. So as many of you know, but just to make sure we level set for everyone, about 35% of food goes uneaten in the US. That is about $408 billion worth of food that's never eaten. It has huge implications in terms of the resources it takes to grow, transport, cook, cool, store all of that food. In fact, it tallies up to those numbers you see on the right here. We estimate that about 4% of all emissions across the US are due to, can be traced back to food going uneaten. In addition to 14% of all freshwater use, almost 20% of cropland use, and to add insult to injury, food is the #1 product entering our landfills today. At the same time, with such a huge footprint, it offers a huge opportunity. No one wakes up in the morning wanting to waste food, and if we all get together and actually are able to achieve the national and international goal of cutting food loss and waste in half, that would help us reduce the greenhouse gas impact equivalent to 16 million cars, and enough water. It would save enough water to give water to 29 million homes. It could lead to a 17% reduction in loss of biodiversity and save an area of land greater than that of Arizona. All this while also providing 4 billion additional meals and $73 billion in net financial benefit. So it's an enormous opportunity. If we can even do half that, I think we would all take it. So with that, I would love to explore with our partners. what our recommendations are for the changes to the Farm Bill that can really help to achieve some of that opportunity. So with that, I'm excited to introduce today's presenters. Emily Broad-Leib is a clinical professor of law and the founding director of the Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic. She has been a partner of mine in crime for about a decade now, and trust me, you are in good hands with her leading today's presentation. Yvette Cabrera is the food waste director at Nrdc. That has been a wonderful partner, as well as Alex Nichols Vinuesa, sorry, Alex, who's manager of food loss and waste at WWF. And Joseph Beckman is a clinical fellow and attorney and Emily's colleague at the Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic. So we are excited to have these experts here with us today. And Emily is our first presenter, so she'll also be moderating our Q&A session once everyone has spoken. Please remember to add your questions in the chat. And with that, Emily, I will hand things over to you.
Thank you so much, Dana, and thanks to ReFED for getting us all organized today for this webinar. I'm really excited to kind of give some overview and framing and then turn to all the other speakers to go over some of the specific recommendations in our report. So as you heard, I'm Emily Broad-Leib. I'm the director of the Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic and a co-author of this report. So for those of you who don't know, the Farm Bill is major federal legislation that's passed by Congress every 5 years and includes, you can go back to the previous slide, sorry about that. Thank you, ReFED. It includes funding for various programs, mostly housed at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, although it spans many different agencies in the ways they touch on the food and agricultural systems. The last Farm Bill authorized $428 billion in spending, and it includes funding over 12 different areas. The largest areas that are included in the Farm Bill are commodity support for farmers, subsidized crop insurance for farmers. So those two pillars are really about risk management support for food producers. The largest title, really 75% of the funding in the Farm Bill, is in the nutrition title, and that's largely for the SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And then the last of the kind of large programs is conservation. So yet, despite all of this funding spent on agricultural production and on food assistance and food security, prior to the last Farm Bill, which was in 2018, not a single dollar was spent on food waste or food recovery. So we spent all this money getting food produced and getting it out to people, but none of it was really looking at what happens with surplus, how do we recover that extra, how do we get food donated? Next slide. So in the lead up to the 2018 Farm Bill, the Food Law and Policy Clinic partnered with ReFED and a group called Food Policy Action to develop a report on opportunities for the Farm Bill. So you can see here the cover. This was the report for the last Farm Bill. And we made recommendations. There were about 16 different recommendations that looked at a bunch of different ways that we could really incorporate priorities on food waste reduction and food recovery into the Farm Bill. And it was actually not only due to our report, there were many other leaders on the Hill, in the administration, and many, many organizations, but it was quite a success in terms of food loss and waste, in that there were about 8 or 9 different priorities that were included in the last Farm Bill. And you can see some of them bulleted on this slide. Some of the top ones were the creation of a food loss and waste liaison position at USDA, the first kind of federal government position really dedicated to food loss and waste and to connecting both across government and between government and the private sector. There was up to $10 million authorized for pilot projects to support community compost and food waste reduction grants, a $4 million in the TFAP, the Emergency Food Assistance Program, which gives food and funding to emergency food providers. $4 million was included to purchase, or to pay for transportation of food from farms that otherwise would have been lost or wasted. All of these were new programs among many others. So it was really exciting and good progress. Next slide. And I must say that food waste has been really a bipartisan issue. It's been amazing, the progress we've seen in both Republican and Democrat-led Congresses and administrations. But last year there was, new Congress, new administration, and there was a lot of new energy and ideas on food loss and waste. So we at the Food Law and Policy Clinic teamed up with NRDC, ReFED, and WWF to put out a joint food loss and waste policy action plan for Congress and the administration. So this came out last year. There were a number of different recommendations across 5 areas, and it included things that Congress can do in bills like the Farm Bill, as well as standalone legislation or other legislation. It included things the administration can do. So it was really kind of the largest sweep. And we were really excited that we had more than 60 different organizations and local governments sign on in support of the recommendations. So this included local and state government, other NGOs, companies such as Marriott, Google, Unilever, Kroger, Hyatt, Hilton, to name a few. So we had a lot of energy around this, and we've since been engaging in efforts to point out specific legislative opportunities to move forward some of those recommendations. Next slide. So in this vein, in April of this year, we published opportunities to reduce food waste in the 2023 Farm Bill. And you can see the cover here. We chatted out the link to it a little bit earlier, but maybe we can stick that in the chat again if you want to access the full report. And this report includes 22 recommendations across 4 areas, which you can see on the screen. So we start from the top of the food recovery hierarchy with food waste prevention opportunities. And then next we have a section with many recommendations on surplus food recovery and donation. We have a section on food waste recycling. And then lastly, there's sort of a cross-cutting section on food waste reduction coordination, which includes recommendations on things that can be done throughout the administration to help continue to try to achieve our goal at reducing food loss and waste. There's also an executive summary to the report that gives the top 2 or 3 recommendations in each category that we structured based on ones that we think are the most impactful, the most feasible, and the most cost effective. And then there's an appendix to the report that also lists all of the recommendations by which title of the Farm Bill we think they can fit in. And that's to really make it easy for policymakers to figure out where those changes need to be. So today we're going to talk about some of the top recommendations in our executive summary, and we're also going to focus on some recommendations that are really either low or no cost. Next slide. Before I turn it to the speakers to talk about some of the priority areas, I wanted to note just a few things. I already mentioned the Farm Bill is a great opportunity to really try to achieve our national food waste reduction goal, which was set in 2015 by USDA and EPA, which was to halve food waste by 2030. We've taken some steps to get there, but I think the next few years are really going to be vital if we want to be able to reach that goal or come close to reaching that goal. As I mentioned already, there's been deep bipartisan support of measures to reduce food loss and waste. A number of the pending legislation in Congress, all different marker bills, have been bipartisan, and we've seen support across administrations and across Congresses. So there's 2 main things I want to really point out on what we can think about putting into the Farm Bill. The first are a bunch of low cost and no cost solutions, some of which you'll hear of today, which are tweaks to existing funding and programs in the Farm Bill that really help include food recovery and food waste reduction as part of those programs to make sure that this is part of what's able to get that funding that exists. The Farm Bill is also a great way to address a lot of different priority topics that we're not going to get into today because we've spoken about them across many of our organizations in various other places. But for example, date labeling, standardizing the date labels on food and making them clear is a great topic that can be included in the Farm Bill. And in fact, one of the 2 committees in the House of Representatives where the Food Date Labeling Act has been referred is the House Agriculture Committee, which works on the Farm Bill. The Food Donation Improvement Act, which seeks to update the liability protection for food donors and food recovery organizations, also really fair game for the Farm Bill. And in the Senate, the legislation that's pending is referred to the Senate Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry Committee, which is the committee that works on the Farm Bill. And then another area that we've talked a lot about elsewhere has been around improving and enhancing the tax incentives for food donation. There's also pending legislation on that called the Further Incentivizing Nutritious Donations of Food Act. Tax is not often in the Farm Bill, but in the 2008 Farm Bill, there was a title dedicated to tax issues. So it is fair game for inclusion. So there's it's the way that I really like to think about the Farm Bill is both what's there now, how can we update those things and make changes to them and add new funding? And then are there other priorities out there that could fit into this because the Farm Bill is so expansive? Next slide. So I'm actually now going to turn it over to our first speaker to talk about the report, and that is Yvette Cabrera, who's Director of Food Waste at NRDC. Take it away, Yvette.
Thanks so much, Emily. And thank you so much to ReFED for hosting this conversation. We're so excited to have so many people listening in and getting the word out about this wonderful report. I'm Yvette Cabrera. I'm the Director of Food Waste at NRDC, and I'm going to tell you a little bit today about our recommendations on food waste recycling. So our landfills are filling up, and as Dana mentioned, food is the largest component in them. And despite improvements in food waste prevention and food rescue, there will always be some food that is inevitably discarded or food scraps that cannot be eaten. And recycling that food waste, either through composting or anaerobic digestion, keeps food waste out of landfills and instead closes a loop on the food system, contributing to better soil matter and reducing soil loss. And according to ReFED, recycling remaining food waste after prevention and rescue has the potential to divert 20.9 million tons of food scraps from landfills and produce a net financial benefit of $239.7 million. And the 2023 Farm Bill should support methods of food waste management that are sustainable, economically beneficial, and limit the use of landfill space and reliance on incinerators. So here are some of the top recommendations we make in the report for doing so. The first one is providing grants to support proven state and local policies that reduce food waste disposed in landfills or incinerators. State and local policies such as organic waste bans, waste diversion requirements, landfill taxes, and pay-as-you-throw policies have been proven to move the needle on reducing food waste and are essential to divert food waste from landfills and incinerators. And we've seen states like Vermont, Massachusetts, Maryland, California, and New York implement bans and are having great success. When food waste generators that produce a certain threshold of food waste, like grocery stores or hospitals, are prevented from transporting organic waste to landfills or have a strong financial reason not to waste food, they will make changes such as offering smaller portions, donating surplus food, recycling food scraps, and repurposing their leftovers. But for anyone who's worked on this or knows about them, implementing this sort of policy change is costly and time consuming. And that's why we're recommending $650 million should be provided in yearly funding across 10 years to support the planning or implementation of these proven state and local tribal government policies like those I just mentioned. And as part of this, we are also recommending Congress require the USDA in collaboration with the EPA to maintain a database of proven state and local food waste reduction policies and their impacts. And that's because we need to know what is working and where and be able to share that knowledge broadly. And the next Farm Bill should enact these measures under the miscellaneous title or a new food waste reduction title. Next slide, please. And the next one is providing grants and loans for the development of organic waste processing infrastructure. In addition to implementing waste bans, waste diversion requirements, zero waste goals, and waste prevention plans, state and local communities must also develop their organic waste processing capabilities to manage the organic waste diverted from landfills and to realize the benefits of these strategies. Both compost and anaerobic digestion infrastructure have the potential to convert food waste into productive soil amendments. And similar to what we just talked about, these organic waste processing capabilities are also incredibly costly. And that's why we're calling on Congress to build on existing programs like the Community Compost and Food Waste Reduction Project program by increasing the funding available expanding the list of eligible entities, and removing the matching requirement. In the 2022 Community Compost and Food Waste Reduction Package, the funding cap was increased from $90,000 to $300,000. And priority is now given to applicants that include other food waste reduction strategies in their proposal beyond composting, which is great because we want to consistently be pushing folks to think higher up the hierarchy where we can have more environmental benefits. However, the next round of the funding, the USDA should expand the eligibility of awardees from solely local governments to also include state and regional governments, and authorize private partnerships with NGOs to improve the ability to scale efforts across regions. And additionally, the USDA should remove the 25% matching requirement for grant applicants, which is oftentimes burdensome for applicants to meet. There are also other funding programs that Congress should increase funding for, like the solid waste management grants and the water and waste disposal loans and grant programs, all which could be used to address food waste. Congress should also adopt new strategies to develop composting and anaerobic digestion infrastructure. And specifically, Congress should provide $200 million per year for 10 years in new composting infrastructure as it was envisioned in the Compost Act and the Zero Food Waste Act. The next Farm Bill should enact these measures under the miscellaneous title or a new food waste reduction title. Next slide, please. The next recommendation is to support end markets through crop insurance benefits and increase federal procurement of compost products. Creating end markets for compost products will support increased composting, and by giving compost facilities a market to sell compost, the facilities may be able to reduce their tipping fees and draw more food waste generators to compost rather than landfill their waste. In turn, this will make composting a more viable and less expensive option than throwing organic waste materials in a landfill. Farmers can also benefit from compost end markets as they can use the soil amendment products derived from composting or anaerobic digestion to improve the quality of their soil. And to support compost, we're calling on Congress to create a crop insurance premium incentive program, offering farmers a per acre bonus for applying compost products to their fields before planting. And this has already been done for other regenerative soil practices like cover crops, so we know it's possible. And we also want Congress to require federal agencies to purchase compost made from organic waste material when purchasing landscaping services, for example. Congress has used the federal government's purchasing power to set standards around environmental issues in other areas, and we're asking them to do that again for compost from food scraps. And these recommendations could be made possible through the crop insurance title in the Farm Bill. And that's it for food waste recycling. So now I'm going to turn it over to our colleague Alex Nichols-Vinuenza to tell you more about food waste prevention.
Great, thank you, Yvette, and hi everyone, great to be here. I'm going to touch briefly on an issue that's near and dear to my heart, which is how Congress can incentivize food waste prevention and education programming in K-12 schools. So educating students on food waste can have both immediate and long-term benefits. I think any of us who are parents can certainly understand that if kids are passionate about a topic, they're going to be champions of that at home and their communities. But not only that, as a child grows up, their knowledge of sustainable food consumption in early education is going to inform their practices as consumers in the marketplace. Food waste occurs in schools today for a variety of reasons. It could be incorrect portion sizes, insufficient time periods for students to eat, or policies that oblige students to take all food versus only what they want. And there are practical and proven ways to address these issues, but schools often struggle with the implementation of these solutions due to the cost. So there's a couple of opportunities for Congress here in the Farm Bill. First and foremost, they should lower the financial burden on schools by providing competitive grants for schools to conduct food waste audits to see where their waste is coming from, and then to really implement some of those proven solutions. And all of this can build on the School Food Recovery Act, which was introduced last year. The second piece that again is very straightforward is mandating offer versus serve. Right now, offer versus serve allows students to choose only those desired components of their lunch or their breakfast. versus being served everything. And so there's some obvious waste reduction potential with that. And today the USDA only encourages offer versus serve, and we believe it would make a major impact to mandate that policy. Another area that when you want to talk about education and educating students on food waste, there's several programs that Congress can reauthorize and modify. FASLP, which provides funding for ag and nutrition education in schools. This can be modified to require food waste education as part of it, or at the very least to award extra points to grant applications to schools that include food waste education as a part of their focus. Second, the farm to school program, which has been very popular, demand regularly exceeds what's available in terms of funding. And what farm to school does is it combines food waste education with improved access to local food from local producers and farmers. And the program, the link to waste is that it's been shown to effectively reduce waste by helping students develop a greater appreciation and connection to the origins of their food. So that program should be expanded. And both of these implementation opportunities should be made through the nutrition title of the 2023 Farm Bill. Next slide, please. Great. On farms, as so many of us saw, especially during the beginning of the pandemic, there is a tremendous opportunity to develop our infrastructure for post-harvest food recovery. And this can be accomplished through the Farm Bill in a variety of ways. It can be through the expansion of existing grant programs, such as the community food projects and the local agriculture market program. And then with some specific modifications to earmark funding for on-farm food waste and food recovery projects, incentivizing partnerships with local food recovery organizations, and then removing that matching requirement that they include today. Another important mechanism that should be considered is a procurement program that would purchase and distribute surplus food from farms to those in need. And this can really build on the key lessons from past efforts, such as the Farm to Family Food Box program, so that a future procurement model would measure and really have accountability for the program's procurement from women-owned, BIPOC, socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers to improve the inclusivity, compensation for transportation costs, and really giving end recipients the dignity of choice of what food they're receiving, not having a one-size-fits-all, but giving them that flexibility to choose what meets their dietary and their cultural needs. Food must obviously be high quality and not too close to spoilage. And there should be reporting all the way through the procurement process from on-farm recovery to the point of donation to make sure that we're not simply moving waste from one part of the supply chain to another. A quick note that a lot of these recommendations are built into the Fresh Produce Procurement Reform Act of 2021 that provides a model for this. And then last but not least, Congress can build out on-farm food recovery by reauthorizing and expanding TFAP, or the Farm to Food Bank program. TFAP's aim is to reduce food waste, provide food to individuals, and develop relationships between food providers and recovery organizations. It's been highly successful, but it should be modified in the Farm Bill to remove that 50% match requirement, to eliminate that barrier to access, and then also just increase the overall available funding so that there's adequate funding for more states to participate. So with that, I will turn it over to Joseph to discuss food waste reduction coordination opportunities.
Thanks, Alex. Hello, everyone. My name is Joseph Beckman, and I'm a clinical fellow and attorney with the Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic. The last section of our recommendations covers food waste reduction coordination. As Emily mentioned, this section of the report addresses the lack of comprehensive research and federal agency coordination in data and research on food waste. Such coordinated efforts are needed to provide insight on areas that future policymaking should prioritize. Our first recommendation is to direct the USDA to prioritize grant applicants that have a food donation contract with a food recovery organization across a range of Farm Bill programs. As previously mentioned, the USDA supports regional and local food system development through grant programs like the Local Agricultural Market Program, or LAMP, and the Community Food Project, CFP, among others. These grants have generated new income sources for small, beginning, veteran, and socially disadvantaged farmers and create new market opportunities for value-added and niche products. Given the nature of the work funded by these and other USDA grants, which aims to support food system development and opportunities for food producers, the USDA should also leverage these grant programs to incentivize food donation and food waste reduction. Therefore, Congress should demonstrate its commitment to food waste reduction by encouraging programs or organizations applying for USDA grant funding to donate surplus food and prevent food from being wasted in the first place. This could be done by modifying grant selection processes to preference applicants with surplus food donation contracts with a food recovery organization. This would encourage applicants to take the first step in donating edible food that would otherwise be wasted. As an example, California has regulations to require food donation contracts as part of their efforts to reduce short-lived climate pollutants. Starting in 2022, food generators like supermarkets and distributors are obligated to recover as much food as possible that would otherwise be wasted. To prove they have a plan to do this, food generators must have a contract or written agreement with a food recovery organization or service, which ensures that when food providers have surplus food, donating the food will not impose an additional burden on finding a food recovery organization to accept that food. Congress should enact these priorities and requirements for any grant programs where grant money is used for food procurement or for developing markets for food. Such a provision can be incorporated through various titles of the Farm Bill, including the horticulture title when dealing with programs like LAMP and the nutrition title when dealing with programs like CFP. Next slide, please. Our second recommendation for food waste reduction coordination is to provide funding for the Federal Interagency Food Loss and Waste Collaboration. In 2018, the FDA, USDA, and EPA launched an interagency task force known as the Federal Interagency Food Loss and Waste Collaboration that is committed to working towards the national goal of reducing food loss and waste by 50% by 2030. In support of this goal, in 2019, the collaboration published a national food waste reduction strategy that identifies 6 priority areas. The collaboration periodically reports through its website on various projects it conducts to reduce food waste. For example, in line with the second priority area to increase consumer education, the agencies increased their social media presence, developed informational websites, hosted webinars, and developed other educational materials related to food waste. While it has taken successful steps and is an overall positive development, the collaboration should be given $2 million in annual funding and a mandate to expand its membership to continue to scale its work. Congress should also mandate regular reporting on the collaboration's progress. Congress should require the collaboration to create a national plan to meet the national goal to have food waste by 2030. And as part of this plan, the collaboration should establish food waste reduction timelines, metrics, and benchmarks to track the government's progress in reaching these goals. This can help businesses chart progress and develop their own plans to support achievement of the national goal. Congress should also require a broader set of federal agencies to engage in the collaboration, as many other agencies play a role in the food system through food safety and enforcement, food procurement, and food distribution, and could improve their impact on food waste reduction and food recovery. This could include the Department of Defense, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Education, and the General Services Administration, among others. Congress should further require the collaboration create an external advisory committee to provide needed input on programming and policy issues. This committee will position the collaboration to better understand existing and future challenges facing food waste, to acquire the latest data regarding food loss and waste, and to stay on top of innovative solutions from leading experts. Next slide, please. Our third highlighted recommendation for food waste reduction collaboration is to provide funding for the Food Loss and Waste Reduction Liaison and create a broader research mandate. In the 2018 Farm Bill, Congress formally established a Food Loss and Waste Reduction Liaison within the USDA. The liaison fills an important role for federal food waste reduction. It coordinates food waste reduction efforts across agencies, researches and publishes research on sources of food waste, supports organizations engaged in food loss prevention and recovery, and recommends innovative ways to promote food recovery and reduce food waste. However, the liaison only receives enough funding to staff the individual liaison position with no funding for additional support staff, which inhibits its ability to fulfill the statutory mandate. To address this, and given the scale of the challenges of United States food waste and the range of opportunities, Congress should increase the funding and develop the liaison position into a food loss and waste office so that there are more staff and capacity to carry out the duties set out in the Farm Bill. This would mean increased funding for additional staff and for internal and external research and pilot projects. This will also enable the liaison or office to coordinate initiatives more effectively within government offices and between all levels of government and private institutions. Increased funding could also be used to create a network for the liaison to coordinate with regional hubs, as the types of food waste and the barriers to food recovery vary across regions. Congress could model this new regional research component on the National Food Waste Reduction Act of 2021. This act could create a food waste research program within the liaison's office that establishes a partnership with 5 regional partner institutions. In partnership with the liaison, these regional partner institutions will plan, conduct, and arrange for public research, data, education, and recommendations pertaining to food waste reduction and food recovery issues locally, regionally, and nationwide. Congress should also identify modernizing and expanding national food waste data and farm food waste loss measurement as explicit goals for the liaison, using the additional funding provided. Federally funded research currently fails to address these key issues. By researching methods to measure farm losses, the federal government could provide the data necessary to identify tailored solutions to on-farm food waste and supply chain food loss. I will now pass it off to Emily to bring us into the Q&A portion of our webinar.
All right. So I don't know if, okay. So I'm really excited. First of all, the chat has been amazing. There's lots of questions coming in. There's lots of people answering questions and good discussion. So keep it going. I want to just remind everyone again that we're also starting at 2 Eastern, going to be hosting a listening session for the White House conference, which I think will be a good chance to have more dialogue and raise other ideas. If you are not able to join that because you, I know it's a little oversubscribed, feel free to send us things, and I'm hoping we can also save the chat from here and maybe pull some of those ideas. I want to take about maybe 10 to 15 minutes and answer some of the questions that have come in. We're not going to get to all of them, but we'll do our best. So to our speakers, maybe we'll keep the answers somewhat concise. I'm going to start with one for Yvette to answer, which was a question that was about how do the recommendations in this report center the voices and lived experience with those who are most impacted by food waste contribution to hunger, climate change, and economic injustice? So Yvette, do you think you can take a stab at that?
Yeah, thanks. And that's a really wonderful question. So thanks for asking it. I want to start off by saying there are plenty of other organizations that contributed to the development of this report and the recommendations in it. And we actually have a full acknowledgement section where folks can see the breadth of organizations that reviewed the recommendations and added their input. And many of those organizations actually represent and work with the communities that are most impacted by hunger, climate change, economic injustice. Nrdc itself works with a series of city governments and local partners within cities that engage in that way similarly. But this report is just the beginning. There's still a ton of work to be done as these recommendations are lifted into the Farm Bill. We need to ensure that the benefits are leveraged by the communities that have lived experience with the worst impacts of hunger, climate, and economic injustice. So for example, we need to do the work to ensure that a bulk of the funding that we're calling for is prioritized for these specific communities, and do things like holding listening sessions to understand how and where to do this and really hear from those communities. So thanks for your question, and it's an ongoing endeavor.
Thanks, Yvette. There was another question that came in that was sort of a little bit more about like big picture, how these recommendations relate to the Farm Bill. So Joseph, I don't know if you can take a stab. The question was, can you help us understand the costs and benefits of first adding a food waste title to the Farm Bill versus incorporating food waste through existing titles? And second, focusing on relevant pending legislation versus focusing on incorporating what's in this pending legislation in the Farm Bill as far as like where to put energy. Go for it.
Absolutely. It's a great question. So for starters, one of the ideas behind adding a food waste reduction title is really to serve as an all-encompassing element to have all of these different recommendations and house them in a very clear message from the government saying we are committed to our national goal at reducing food waste in half by 2030. With the inclusion of several food waste provisions in the 2018 Farm Bill, this serves as like a step in the further direction of actually making a message to the world that we are really committed towards these. So that's one of the main benefits of adding a specific food waste reduction title. However, a lot of these, as we were mentioning in our priority recommendations, can actually be housed in existing titles. And that's just based on whether they are affiliated with specific grants or they are affiliated with specific programs in general. So where applicable in the report, it does actually specify whether or not we recommend including it in there. But to the second point about where to focus the effort, I would say that we all agree that focusing your efforts across the board is definitely something that we encourage. However, some of the pending legislation, because it may be slightly outside of the Farm Bill scope, we do mention that it would be great to actually work towards passing that legislation. So advocacy efforts engaged in increasing the likelihood of passing that is always encouraged. And then in addition, there are opportunities really just to continue expressing the different areas that are of interest to your respective organizations, just to try to encourage any of these being incorporated in the Farm Bill where relevant. And again, in the report, it does actually list out where those are specifically applicable and how to best approach the advocacy effort.
Thank you. All right, Alex, I'm coming over to you with, there are a couple of questions I think you could probably answer. One was about, about a lot of local interest in food rescue, but lack of the transportation infrastructure to support agencies in getting that material safely to people's mouths and bellies. Is there an opportunity to leverage funding to specifically highlight how to get food from point A to point B in smaller cities and communities who lack infrastructure? And others may want to jump in on this too, but I don't know, Alex, it came up, I think, in discussion of like the procurement of food and delivery.
Yeah, I can touch on that piece, and then everyone else please pile on. But I mean, that is absolutely one thing we identified in learning from past procurement models, is that transportation costs have to be included to make sure that you can get that last mile of the food to the point of donation. It has to be feasible for all the partners involved. It has to be feasible for farmers, and it has to be feasible for donation partners and rescue agencies. So I think we're very much clued in on that as well. That's a good point. Anything else y'all would add?
I think it's a really good point. I mean, it's a gap, and it's certainly, covered in a lot of the recommendations. Yvette, back to you. Someone specifically asked this to you, was that you mentioned anaerobic digestion and compost also create productive soil amendments. So the question was, does Nrdc advocate for biogas from anaerobic digestion as well? And I don't know if you want to take that, elaborate in any way that you'd like.
Sure, thanks. Another great question. Anaerobic digestion can be an effective approach to extracting energy from food waste as part of diversion from disposal. However, it has some pitfalls. And so we do support so long as it's done right. And for example, we need to make sure we're directing waste materials to their highest and best ecological use. So the choice of AD versus composting or other options should take into account whether nutrients will be preserved or lost. For instance, if digestate is landfilled after energy extraction, then nutrients are lost. And how to maximize their utility in feeding soils. We also want to make sure that we're reducing contamination, so ensuring source separated feedstock whenever possible, so as to maximize the use of digestible components and reduce reliance on separation technologies and processes. And also lowering contamination will help ensure technologies are operating at higher efficiency. So, those are just some of the things we think about when thinking about AD, but it is a solution when done correctly.
All right, the questions are coming in fast and furious. I'm going to try to take a couple others that have come in. There's a question that kind of came in about date labeling, which the question is long, so I'm probably not going to read it in detail, but I think the question was really about like, what is the solution to confusing date labels? And I'm glad we have a question on it because I briefly mentioned it in the beginning and we didn't go into detail. So I don't know if Joseph, you want to get started, Yvette, you want to jump in on that one as well. It's definitely a top priority for a number of our organizations.
Absolutely. We're always excited to talk about date label standardization. There is pending legislation currently that we're really excited about. We hope that it either gets passed as a standalone bill or through the Farm Bill. But in general, one thing that we always talk about is how date labels do really just result in a great deal of food waste because of the confusion around what their meaning is. And in general, we say that the best solution, if there is not actual legislation passed that does adopt a dual date labeling system where it only allows you to use two different dates, one to signify safety and one to signify quality, then the second best option would be really just to work on increasing the general education and awareness campaigns surrounding date labels. Across the United States without any national legislation on them. There are tons of different jurisdictions with tons of different date label laws. So if there is any way for the given states to actually discuss individually what the date label laws are within their respective state, that would help avoid some of the food waste that does exist from the date labeling side. And I'll let Yvette say anything that she might want to say.
I'll just reiterate that I think the education component is absolutely critical. Even if when we do pass this legislation and we change the system, it's going to be critical to educate folks on what these date labels mean. And without that knowledge, we're going to find ourselves in a similar position as we are now. So, passing that legislation is only half the work. And I'll also just say, in the absence of, that standardized system currently, we continue to call on people to use your senses to determine if something is good to eat. And also, having that knowledge ourselves, sharing that with our family and with our friends and other people, and kind of debunking some myths around date labels.
All right. Let's see. There was a question that I think came in to Joseph about the food loss and waste liaison position being permanent or commission. I don't know, Joseph, if you want to take that or you want me to jump in on that one?
I feel like you should answer a question since you've been moderating this whole time.
It's a really good question. The last Farm Bill created the position, but it didn't give it funding. But it has received, after I think the first budget cycle after the Farm Bill there wasn't funding for it, but it's received funding every budget cycle since then. But for the moment, it's still been getting kind of year to year funding. So that is an opportunity in the Farm Bill as well to expand the position, give it more funding and make it more secure. Because I think when you think about the scale of time it takes to really invest in and plan these programs, if it's sort of someone is doing this on a year-to-year basis, that makes it somewhat difficult. Okay, there's so many great questions. I'm gonna jump in with like one or two really quick last ones, and then I'm gonna turn it back to ReFED to close us out. And we're gonna end a little early so we can all transport to our other Zoom location for the White House conference listening session. Alex, there were like one or two, maybe I'll tell you both of them and you can tell me if you think they're ones you can answer. One was about, should we be addressing the USDA nutritional requirements since they contribute to excess waste in schools? I have a thought on that too, but I don't know if you want to jump in on that because you talked a little bit about schools. Or there was a question also about opportunities to support upcycling. I don't know if you want to answer either of those.
I'll let you take the first one, but on the second one, I will say for upcycling, that's certainly something like what we're thinking about is you have this surplus that's existing on farms today. How do we get it to those in need? And what we've seen in the previous procurement programs is that's built relationships. That's been one of the positives, right? Is that it helped build relationships with different players across the supply chain. That could be with between growers and food rescue agencies, with processors, with food hubs. And so one of the follow-on effects that we're hoping from, if you were to pass this type of a procurement model, is that those relationships carry on so that it goes beyond just donation, but then you're identifying additional channels for that surplus. So it's certainly something we've been thinking about, but open to ideas as well if you see further opportunity.
I'll respond on the nutrition requirements because I think it's a really important one that we've talked about a lot. So the data show that the rate of food waste in schools roughly mirrors the rate of food waste in households. So there's not like more. I mean, there's a lot of pushback saying the nutrition standards in schools are causing all of this waste, but I think the evidence shows really that they're not causing the waste. So I think that it's really important to be serving kids nutritious meals. I think all the other opportunities we talk about are really ways to say there's a learning opportunity. It's a place to catch future consumers when they're young to learn about food waste. A lot of the things that Alex talked about doing audits within schools to figure out where the waste is. It's often that the food is just not being well prepared. It's not that there's like something inherently wrong with the nutrition requirements. I think it was really important to bring that up. And I would hate to see us go in a kind of negative direction in efforts to reduce waste.
And I'll just add one to jump onto that what we've seen in schools is that if you do go to something really quickly that's healthy and you're not doing things like maybe taste testing with students and you're just sort of surprising with it, that can actually lead to waste as well. So there needs to be this auditing, this feedback process so that you're right sizing it to that local context. So that's the other thing that we've seen in our experience in schools.
Yeah. All right, there's so much more. There were questions about insect farming, which I'm really excited about. I'd love to follow up on that. There are questions about smart labels and, like so many other great questions. I'm hoping that we can capture some from the chat. We'll try to follow up if we can, but I want to, at this time, both thank our speakers and turn it back over to Dana to close out this webinar. So thank you.
Wow, thank you. I don't think I've ever seen a chat the way the chat has been. It's like every time I've read a note, there's been 42 new messages to get through. So I'm so thrilled to see everyone so engaged. And thank you so much to our presenters for really laying out our recommendations so clearly and so well, and the logic behind them and everything. I really appreciate all of that. And to everyone who joined us. So yeah, I just want to close out. We know Farm Bill is such a huge opportunity, and the interest, this is the time, right? This is when a lot of the sausage is starting to get made in the Farm Bill. So being active now is a really critical point in the process, as we are early on. So thank you to all of you. Please keep being engaged. Please take these ideas with you to whatever forums you engage in, and hopefully they will reverberate enough to actually make it into the Farm Bill in the end. And with that, we'll close out. We will be sending a link with a recording of today's webinar. So please share that with colleagues who you think might be interested or weren't able to attend today. If you have any questions or feedback, please reach out to us at insights@refed.org, and we'll make sure they get to the right person. And if you have registered for the White House listening session, we will see you in a few minutes. I know some people saw that it was closed. We actually opened it back up. So if you're one of those people who want to be on it, tried to register and weren't able to, maybe Cole, you can post that link one more time just so that you're able to join us. And remember, that is a different link from the one we are on now. And with that, we will say thank you and go forth. Take care.